My name is Bill Yarber. I'm the Senior Director of the Rural Center for AIDS STD Prevention. This is a joint project of Indiana University, University of Colorado, and University of Kentucky. We have established the Ryan White Distinguished Leadership Award. That award was established in 2009, and Jeannie White Ginder, Ryan's mother, was the first recipient. And we're here today to present it to C. Everett Koop, MD. Ryan was a 13-year-old typical Indiana rural youth who contracted HIV from tainted blood products for treatment of his hemophilia. And during this times afterwards, he was harassed, he was isolated at school, taunting, and he received a lot of difficulties with the public accepting his condition. And throughout all of this, he remained courageous, he remained determined, and Ryan's vision was to increase AIDS awareness and also to end discrimination and stigma of persons with HIV/AIDS. Throughout all this difficulty, there was enormous media attention, and actually he became a hero for many people in the country. Before his death in April the 8th, 1990, he became well known, and he had, in his efforts to increase AIDS awareness, soon after his death, the Ryan White Care Act was established. This act was the largest single federal effort to provide resources for persons with HIV/AIDS. Before his death, he spoke to many schools and communities. He and his mother traveled around the country as spokespersons for HIV/AIDS. Ryan had planned to attend Indiana University in Bloomington, but his death occurred before that, and within a few weeks here, we will be celebrating the 20th anniversary of the death of Ryan. His legacy continues on, and one way we continue his legacy is to recognize outstanding contributions through this award. In honor of the legacy of Ryan White, the Rural Center for AIDS STD Prevention has established the Ryan White Distinguished Leadership Award, and this award is presented for individuals for outstanding contribution in HIV/AIDS. Today we'll be presenting to Dr. Koop. Before we do that, Jeannie White Ginder, Ryan's mother, has a picture and some words to say to Dr. Koop.
This is a picture of Dr. Koop, Surgeon General Koop, and Ryan White in 1988, and it is such a privilege to see you again.
Thank you.
You was such a blessing in our lives when you came forth, when the political figures were not doing so, acknowledging this disease, and you said, Ryan White, this boy should be in school. Right. So I want to thank you, and it's so wonderful to see you again. But thank you from the bottom of my heart for all the people living with HIV and AIDS today, even. You've made a difference in everybody's lives.
Thank you.
This award is given today to Dr. Koop for his outstanding contributions in HIV/AIDS prevention. There are very few people that have done the courageous things that you did in your Surgeon General's report and your pamphlet that went out to almost every household in the United States, Understanding AIDS. We admire the courageous efforts that you have and that you did, and that certainly made a big difference in our efforts to control HIV/AIDS. Certainly it's an honor for the Rural Center for AIDS STD Prevention to present you this award, and I'm going to read what the award says before Jeannie presents it to you. The Rural Center for AIDS STD Prevention at Indiana University presents to Dr. C. Everett Koop, MD, Doctor of Science, the Ryan White Distinguished Leadership Award, in appreciation of your numerous outstanding contributions to HIV/AIDS prevention and for being an exemplary bearer of the standard of excellence and commitment needed to combat HIV/AIDS. March the 17th, 2010, Hanover, New Hampshire. Jeannie, could you present that to Dr. Koop?
Thank you very much.
Congratulations. Yes, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes. Dr. Koop, you may recall in June the 2nd, or excuse me, the June the 5th, 1981, was that infamous CDC report in the Mortality and Morbidity Weekly Report about 5 young men in Los Angeles who were diagnosed with a rare pneumonia, pneumocystis pneumonia. And that really brought attention, I think, to many people in the country about possibly what might be occurring. And of course, it wasn't known as AIDS at that time. But that report came out a few months before you were actually sworn in as Surgeon General in November of '81. I mean, when you became Surgeon General, did you ever imagine that you would have to face such a major health problem such as AIDS?
No, sir, I never imagined it, but I can tell you, if ever there was a disease made for a Surgeon General, it was AIDS. And you have to remember, on that day that you told about the first report from MMWR, no one ever heard of AIDS before. We didn't even have a name for AIDS. The government had no position. But, and this is very important, the cabinet of the President of the United States had a position. Not the President, but the cabinet. And it was this: who gets AIDS? Promiscuous women, homosexual men, IV drug abusers, people who are pregnant and shouldn't be. Don't they deserve what they get? And that was, if you want to say it, the official word that you would get if a member of the cabinet talked to you about AIDS. I was the only person in the Public Health Service who had ever seen a case of pneumocystis carinii pneumonia. And in my job as a pediatric surgeon, where you have to diagnose that pneumonia by an actual lung biopsy, I saw them all the time. Well, you'd think that would give me maybe that much headlong with these guys. I had questions immediately because, you know, shortly after that, they came back and reported 20 young men with another disease, and I was the only person that ever saw that. But I raised a question, and this should be history. I raised a question and I said, I know nothing about what we're talking, but I do know this. If you are discussing a new disease that is contracted by homosexuals, you have one huge load on your hands because of the forced sodomy in prisons. And I said, the Public Health Service, as you know, has control of the federal prisoners. And we have no preparation whatsoever if there is a connection. Well, you know, they laughed at that. And a couple of years later, just the people leaving the D.C. jail had 70% positivity for AIDS. If I'm describing to you something that seems very chaotic, it was.
Wow, so that was is that the way you would characterize the federal government's response after that CDC report came
Yes.
out? That's chaotic. So how were you able then, as the deaths of AIDS mounted, I mean, you were really the highest official in Washington, D.C. that actually mentioned AIDS, the first person to really talk about it. What kind of barriers did you have to overcome to do that?
Well, lots of public ones and a few private ones. And I believe in filling holes. And when people leave government and there's nobody appointed to do their job, I stepped in and did it. Because I don't see, I was a new kid on the block. I didn't even know the rules.
Sure.
You don't do that, but I did it. And pretty soon, people had confidence in what I said, and they know I never lied to them. And I not only told them about how you get AIDS, but how you don't get AIDS. Because you'll remember, this was an era in which people didn't know how you contracted AIDS. and they thought you got it from
Mosquitoes,
case
yeah.
handles,
Yes.
computer keyboards,
Mosquitoes,
knives and
right?
forks.
Yeah.
And we had a wonderful study on hemophiliac people who had grown up together and who lived together, and we found that they shared towels, 6% shared toothbrushes, that all sorts of things were shared, and there was no contamination and no passage of the disease. Gave me tremendous authority when I said it doesn't do it that way, you know?
Yeah. So in those early days, in your early years as Surgeon General, I bet a lot of times did you feel alone in your voice?
Oh, sure. I felt alone, and you know, I didn't have anybody standing in the sidelines saying, "Go get 'em, boy." You know.
Sure, right, yeah.
And as a matter of fact, people in the cabinet were really opposed to me, and this is pure speculation, but I bet Ronald Reagan had more requests to fire me than any other member
right.
of his government.
You're right. Well, certainly, you know, the things that you did in your report, the Surgeon General's report, I think really established the importance of science, what science says about disease transmission. And in this report, you talked about sex education for young people. You discussed condoms. I mean, those were sort of very unique things at that time. I mean, what led you